This event that we titled Filling the Gaps in Social Protection Systems for Minority Women is an effort to focus on a distinct area that impacts women, and that would be minority women of faith. My name is Ann Mawalda. I'm the Executive Director of Jubilee campaign, which focuses on advocacy for religious minorities, but also vulnerable women. Our UK branch in particular does a lot of work with vulnerable women in several countries. We are very honored to have been provided this space here with the 68th session of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. We've participated in previous years. We've also, on Monday, had an event on North Korea, women in North Korea. So we're very pleased to be able to participate with UNCSW. We would like to thank Coptic Solidarity for co-hosting and collaborating with us to plan this event. And we're very pleased with our very esteemed and relevant panel that will provide to us an overview today. United Nations mechanisms, advocacy organizations, and government authorities across the world alike have recognized the double vulnerabilities faced by women and girls of minority faith communities. Testimonies of survivors have exposed how patriarchal customs and majority religions often work in tandem against women equality, security, and empowerment. This double marginalized, these women and girls are susceptible to rights violations, including gender-based violence, abduction, forced marriage, denial of custody rights, forced faith conversions, enslavement by militant actors, and many more. During our event today, we will be addressing the situation of Coptic women and girls in Egypt, Christian women and girls in Pakistan, and Yazidi women residing in Iraq and resettled in Canada. Despite geographical distances, these women are connected in their suffering of faith-based and gender-based rights violations. But more importantly, they're unified by their resilience and tenacity in the face of such persecution. We're looking forward to the presentations of the representatives of these communities who will share about the holes in social protection systems which expose these faith minority women and girls to violence, enslavement, and forced marriages, and so forth. I would like to now turn over to our moderator today, Ms. Nadine Manza. She's graciously accepted to be the moderator. She is the president of the International Religious Freedom Roundtable Secretariat, as well as a global fellow at the Wilson Center. Previously, Nadine had served 2 terms as chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, and in 2022, she was awarded the Earth Impact Award for advocacy for freedom of religious belief for all communities. In the past 5 years, Nadine has traveled extensively, spending about a month each year in Syria and Iraq. She's a well sought after speaker on religious freedom, building inclusive societies, U.S. foreign policy, and various other topics. Nadine, thank you so much for moderating with us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Nina. Thanks so much for including me in this important discussion, and all of the panelists that we all get to listen to today. As we consider the state of the status of women and girls, and for me coming from a world of religious freedom where we often are considering the conditions of religious freedom globally, it's important that we specifically take stock of the situation of religious persecution of women and girls. Why? Because persecution is often not visible unless we are looking for it. As Open Doors UK has reported, religious persecution against men is typically visible, severe, and focused. Religious persecution against women can be hidden, violent, and complex. I have so much respect for the Jubilee campaign and for Coptic Solidarity and the important work that they do. to improve conditions for women and religious minorities, and of course for organizing this important event. And what I love about the speakers you're going to hear from today is this is just experts on this field. They're people that have lived either from the communities themselves or work closely with the communities we're talking about. So this is kind of like a master class in being able to hear directly from people that can tell us what conditions are like for women and girls in the countries they're working in. And as we look to fill the gaps in social protection systems for minority, especially women, it's the only way that we're going to find how to do that is by listening to people that see what's happening on the ground and can see the problems from there. And that is how we can come together as civil society, governments, international organizations, and religious communities to support these women and girls. So we're going to jump right in and listen to them and hopefully have time for some questions and answers afterwards and be able to have a discussion and learn more about that. I believe we're still starting with Nicholas Leverett, correct? The video? Yes. Okay. So we're excited to have a recorded message from the Special Rapporteur, Mr. Levet. He is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues. And he was a professor of international and European law at the University of Geneva since 2001, where he was subsequently appointed Director of European Studies in 2007. And between 2016 and 19, Mr. Levet was the Director of International Law Department at the University of Geneva. And in order to accept his appointment on the UN Special Rapporteur, Mr. Levet resigned as the Vice President of the Advisory Committee on the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities of the Council of Europe. So now we're going to watch his presentation.
Good afternoon and greetings from Geneva. My name is Nicolas Levrat and I am the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues. I thank the organizer kindly for inviting me to this panel discussion. I sincerely regret that I cannot be there with you all in person for this important discussion on filling the gaps in social protection system for minority women. Considering this year's priority theme of the Commission on the Status of Women, I wish to highlight 3 points related to access to education, special treatment, and the participation of minority women and girls in decision-making process concerning social protection policies and schemes. My first point is that unfettered access to quality education remains a critical key in unlocking minority women and girls' full potential in society. Education empowers. It equips one with the necessary skills and competencies towards a path of employment to life, a secure life. The 16th Minority Forum, which took place in Geneva on 29 November and 1st December 2023, was devoted to minorities and cohesive societies, equality, social inclusion, and socio-economic participation. A key recommendation that was brought forward in the forum is that states should invest in targeted programs that enable minority groups, including women and girls, to acquire the skills necessary to participate effectively in the economy. This includes the following: targeted scholarship, training programs, internships and fellowships in higher education, minority language education, and digital literacy programs. Minority women and girls' full access to quality education serve as a preventive measure against early pregnancy, early and forced marriage, as well as the many other harmful practices to which minority women and girls can be subjected. My second point is that minority women and girls must be given access to services that accommodate to their socio-economic needs. Sometimes, in order for the same level of universal human rights to be enjoyed, diverse and differentiated treatment needs to be applied so as to avoid discrimination. This means that states can be required, under international law, to accommodate the specific socio-economic needs of minority women and girls by providing them with special treatment. This can include ensuring the availability of gender-sensitive social services in minority language, such as legal aid and counseling, as well as sexual and reproductive health services. In the thematic report that I will present tomorrow, to the Human Rights Council, I underscore this point precisely. For persons belonging to minorities, the general right to be treated without discrimination by the state may need to be complemented by an additional right to receive specific treatment as a person belonging to a minority group in order to guarantee effective non-discrimination. The Human Rights Committee specifies this point in its general comment of Article 27 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. My third point is that minority women and girls must be given the space to participate fully and effectively in the decision-making processes concerning the social protection schemes that affect their lives. Minority women and girls should be in the front seat to drive forward such social protection policies as a way to prevent stereotypes, biases, and misconstrued understandings of their lived realities in policymaking and policy outcomes. For my upcoming report to be presented at the 79th session of the General Assembly in the fall this year, I intend to examine institutional arrangements that enable minority rights to flourish at national level. The report will analyze how states' institutions and political traditions allow for the effective participation of minorities in the promotion and guarantee of the highest possible fulfillment of their rights. This includes looking into the role that policies and legal frameworks play in protecting the human rights of women and girls from minority communities, which you will have discussed today, and how women can be guaranteed fair representation in the decision-making processes. I thus warmly invite you all to contribute to this report by sending your input to me in this regard in the coming weeks. So to conclude, yes, women and girls belonging to minorities deserve full access in order to enjoy all the benefits of social protection system. And yes, this may entail recognizing and caring for the special needs resulting from their social position as minority women. With this, I end. I wish you a fruitful discussion and hope to be able to participate in person to one of your next meetings. Thank you.
I appreciated his comments, especially that minority women and girls should have the right to participate in the decision-making for their own communities, their own lives. So much when we talk about religious freedom, it can easily be misconstrued that what we're talking about is that people have the right to go to church and practice their faith, but really what we're talking about is that people have the right to the same human dignity that the majority religion has, that they have that equal citizenship, they have the same rights, and they're free from discrimination. And so I appreciate the work that he does to ensure that and speak out for minority women to have the right to education, to gain those skills they need for their life and to be a part of their own decision making. Now I'm excited to hear our next presenter, Carolyn Doss, an attorney at law. She's founder of Doss & Associates, a law firm that specializes in immigration issues. The client base for the law firm is largely comprised of individuals from Egypt, particularly women and minorities, seeking asylum in the U.S. In addition to her legal work, since 2019, which is I believe when I first met you, Caroline was serving as the president of Coptic Solidarity, a nonprofit organization focused on assisting minorities and supporting those in Egypt working for democracy, freedom, and the protection of the fundamental rights of all Egyptians. Caroline has testified before U.S. Congress on issues facing Copts in Egypt. Caroline, we look forward to hearing from you. And you might have to speak right into the microphone.
Okay, are we on? Very good. Good afternoon, everyone.
You might have to hold it.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to speak about the abduction and forced conversion of Coptic girls and women in Egypt to Islam and the government's role. Something Nadine just said a few moments ago, which really makes a lot of sense. This isn't something you find unless you're actually looking for it. And I do thank everyone on this panel and in this audience for helping us look for it, identify it, and figure out how to resolve it. We'll start with an example of the abduction and forced conversion of Coptic women in Egypt with this one young woman named Irene Shahana. She disappeared January 22nd, 2024, just a few weeks ago. She's 21 years old, and she disappeared during her midterm exams. She's in medical school, was in medical school. After she was abducted, she was able to make a brief call to her family, asking for help, crying, when the call abruptly ended, when her captor grabbed the phone and said to her brother, "Now you can all go to hell." Her parents, in attempting to report the incident, were basically treated in a very hostile manner by the police. Now we'll talk about the government's reaction. The police were very hostile to her family. They gave them the runaround, had them running around all over the country, her father and her brother. State security eventually told her, "Don't bother." She ran away. She converted to Islam, which means they know where she is. The government quickly changed her ID to Muslim. The government forced her family to shut down the Facebook account that was created to help find her. And her family was also threatened by state security to stop publicizing her disappearance. Her brave father, because this rarely happens, in an interview indicated that 6 other Christian girls also disappeared the same month. We pray for his safety, because for him to be speaking out really takes a lot of courage while he's in the middle of the fire. This process of kidnapping and forcing Christian women to convert to Islam in Egypt is used to strip Christian females of their identities and their future. And it's repeated over and over again, all over the country. Coptic Solidarity investigated just 12 of those cases last year, 10 of which were returned and 2 still remain missing. I've personally spoken with numerous victims who were victims of attempted kidnappings. We hear in the media sometimes of some of those cases where families brave enough to actually put together a Facebook post and plead for their child, but there's so many that go unreported. And the attempted ones, they're not even on anyone's radar. Those are the ones that I get to meet because they made it out. And now they're here applying for asylum. Sometimes after these kidnappings take place, the victims will be seen in a video that's posted on YouTube. She'll be sometimes wearing a burqa or a veil, now claiming she willingly converted to Islam while in tears. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few weeks we see a video of Irene saying the same. This tends to happen in cases that are highly publicized, where the female appears in a video saying, "I did this on my own," with tears in her eyes. How's all this possible? The government makes this possible. In all cases, no arrests, no prosecutions of the perpetrators of these crimes. All. So what does that translate to? No justice, no protection for the victims. And in many of these cases, adding to the crime, the government officials threaten the families to keep quiet. And in many of the cases, they issue new ID cards. So that means they are facilitating the conversion to Islam, which makes it also impossible to track these crimes because no police reports are issued, no information is provided, and the victims are forced to stay quiet. Irene is one of so many Coptic women that is held in captivity with the complicity of the Egyptian government. The Egyptian government needs to be held accountable for its role in these crimes of violence that are committed against Christian women. The trafficking and forced conversion of Christian girls and women is a religious cleansing of Christianity in Egypt. What we need to do, what needs to happen, police have to treat these abductions as crimes. They have to stop threatening and intimidating and distracting the family members of the victims. The government officials have to stop issuing ID cards with Islam as the new religion without a proper process in place to ensure the willingness of this conversion. Make no mistake, this is a 2-part crime. The actual abduction and then the government's role in furtherance of the abduction. Formalizing the conversion and deterring the family from finding the victim is the second half of this crime. Rape, kidnapping, and forced conversion is a tool Islamists use in the religious cleansing of Christians in Egypt. And the efficacy of this tool relies on the government's role. The government completes this crime, and they need to be equally held accountable for their role in the forced conversion of Christian women and girls in Egypt. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for your presentation today. It really struck me that this is a two-part crime, the abduction itself, and then of course the government's role and complicity, you said completing the crime. And so there are really two different problems that we need to solve in terms of how to approach these really complex crimes. So we'll definitely discuss this more, and thank you so much for sharing your heart with us and the important work you do to help these victims. We're now going to be talking about the Yazidi community that I'm really interested to hear from our next guest. A community very close to my heart. Nafia Nasso is an activist and healthcare professional as the lead Yazidi resettlement coordinator at Jewish Child and Family Services. She spearheaded Operation Ezra, a landmark initiative to resettle Yazidi refugees in Winnipeg. This effort stands as the largest community-organized Yazidi rescue project. Beyond her advocacy, Nafia founded the Healing Cleansing Company, which I love this, to provide employment opportunities for Yazidi survivors, mainly young women. Since 2014, she has been a vocal advocate for Yazidi genocide awareness, lobbying the Canadian government for more robust action against their persecution. And also we have Jubilee Nasso, and she is a community leader and an advocate for the Yazidi people, leveraging her personal refugee experience to mobilize support for their cause. Through her work with Operation Ezra and the Canadian Yazidi Association, she has made significant strides in awareness, resettlement, and recovery efforts in Canada. Jamila's professional background spans in roles from Bell Canada, the RCMP's War Crime Program, and Ernst & Young, where she focused on mental health, justice, and corporate responsibility. Currently, she is pursuing an MBA with a concentration on finance and sustainability. Thank you, women. We look forward to hearing from you.
You might want to talk close to the microphone.
Okay, is that good? Thank you so much for that welcome. So even just right off the bat, the first story we just heard is so similar to so many experiences of ethnic and religious minorities in Iraq. It just happens to be a different geographic location. Oftentimes, for me and for people who I talk to in the West, a lot of questions are, how did we get here? How did things get so bad? Well, it wasn't by accident, and it didn't happen overnight. The Arabization policies in Iraq, particularly under Saddam Hussein through the late 70s and early 2000s, was a government-led initiative aimed at transforming the ethnic and cultural composition of certain regions, particularly in the north, where majority of Yazidis reside, to favor Arab identity and culture over others. Minority communities like the Yazidis were made vulnerable by forced displacement and these policies. And in later years, the economic meltdown of Iraq, of course, under UN and Western sanctions, the breakdown of the state and security apparatus after the 2003 US-led invasion, and the political failures that followed, which created a perfect power vacuum for non-state actors and terrorist groups like ISIS to sweep in, spread their ideology, and ultimately in 2014 lead to a genocidal campaign against the Yazidis and other ethnic and religious minorities. In August of 2014, the world witnessed as ISIS carried out a methodically planned out genocide against the Yazidi community, abducting over 7,000 Yazidi women and girls and using children, Yazidi children, boys, young boys, as suicide bombers and future terrorists, killing over 5,000 community members, killing them by guns, just shoot blank, burning them alive, and beheading them. Many of those videos circulated, they posted them on social media, and I'm sure many of you have seen those, and forced over 400,000 Yazidis to flee to neighboring countries, to Mount Sinjar. And even in those countries that they fled to seek refuge, they were separated from other refugee populations for their own safety. Because even in a refugee crisis in Syria and other places, Yazidis have to be kept separate from other refugee populations for their own safety. Genocide is, we say, it's not an event, it's a process. Nearly a decade later, we're seeing over 300,000 Yazidis continuing to live in internally displaced people's camps in the Kurdistan region of Iraq in inhumane conditions, lack of health services, mental health support for survivors and women who are able to escape ISIS, insufficient education and resources, little to no economic opportunities, and of course any organization who's left there, international or government, is temporary and a band-aid on the problem. And I think the most horrifying of all this is that there are still 2,700 Yazidi women and girls in ISIS captivity and missing within the region. In Sinjar region, there has been little to no reconstruction efforts. The security issues severely limit any possibility of return to the Yazidi homeland. There are daily airstrikes by Turkish forces, and there are still very active non-state actors and ISIS still in the region. And of course, the harm to Yazidi cultural and religious heritage and the destruction of sacred sites. Now, let's get into Iraq's constitution, which was established in 2005, which forms the foundation for human rights protection, including the rights of religious and ethnic minorities, which highlights really Islam at its core. Article 2 recognizes Islam as the state religion and a primary source of legislation, ensuring laws don't contradict Islamic provisions, democracy, or established rights and freedoms. But it also upholds the religious rights of all individuals to practice their beliefs and manage personal and religious affairs. But we've learned through stories on the ground and lived experience that knowing our rights and lived rights are two very different things. And there are many challenges to legal implementation of this, and several of these are, despite general protections, there's scarcity of laws addressing the unique needs of minorities such as the Yazidis, leaving gaps in protection against forced conversions, conflict-related sexual violence, and forced marriage. In a recent trip to Iraq, I had the opportunity to meet with some Iraqi officials and KRG, Kurdistan Regional Government officials, very senior level people, and they mentioned the trip that the Pope, the historic trip that the Pope made to Iraq to kind of deal and talk about some of the tensions between these communities. And, I just blurted out, I said, what about the forced disappearances or the forced conversions of Yazidis? Like, where's that issue on the table? And they said that the Pope had made a request to the most senior level, like, religious person in Iraq, and it just fell on deaf ears. There was no follow-up, there was nothing. But I was told a request was made by the Pope himself to kind of address some of these challenges, and there was nothing. So I think that says a lot about where the government's stance is. In addition to that, biases within judiciary and law enforcement affecting the fair investigation and prosecution of these crimes, in areas previously or currently under the influence of groups like ISIS. The formal legal system often clashes with tribal laws or the will of these armed groups. The significant displacement and destruction faced by minorities complicates the access to legal services. And of course, underpinning all this is the lack of trust in any legal institution in Iraq at the moment. So kind of the next landmark law that passed in March of 2021 was the Yazidi Survivors Law, which was a groundbreaking step towards justice for communities like the Yazidis. And this law was a critical measure recognizing the genocide against the Yazidis and offering support through financial compensation, reparations for survivors, rehabilitation services, housing and education, employment opportunities, and I think most importantly, memorialization efforts to honor the victims and educate future generations. But despite its passage 3 years later, we've seen many challenges with the implementation of this, including delays in bureaucratic hurdles affecting the speed and effectiveness of delivering on those promises to survivors. So maybe I'll stop there for now, and then we can continue.
So my name is Nafia Nasso, and my family and I arrived in Canada as refugees escaping the clutches of war and persecution. It was a journey marked by hope for a new beginning, away from fear and uncertainties that had colored our days. Years later, the landscape of ethnic and religious minorities back home has deteriorated, with the situation becoming increasingly dire. The summer of 2014 brought this reality into stark relief for us. It was then that the peaceful quiet of our new lives in Canada was shattered by the harrowing news from Sinjar. Phone calls and messages flooded in, painting a picture of unimaginable horror as ISIS unleashed a genocidal campaign against the Yazidi community in Iraq. Our hearts ached with every account of violence, promoting our community in Winnipeg to leap into action. We reached out to local and federal governments, community groups, and anyone who would listen in a desperate plea for help. In this dark hour, an unexpected ally emerged. The first group to extend a hand of solidarity was the Jewish community in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in Canada. This gesture of support was more than just an act of kindness. It was a bond formed through the shared understanding of suffering and the mutual desire to overcome the atrocities of the past and present. Together, we found common ground, a shared narrative of survival and resilience that transcended our different backgrounds. From this union, Operation Ezra was born in early 2015. What started as a partnership between Winnipeg's Jewish and Yazidi communities soon grew into a multi-faith coalition, a testament to the power of unity in the face of adversity. This initiative wasn't just about providing aid, it was about fostering a global community of support for the Yazidi people who had endured so much. Following closely, the Canadian Yazidi Association initiative broadened our outreach, focusing on crucial areas such as education, private sponsorship, and specialized services for trauma recovery, particularly targeting women and children who survived conflict-related sexual violence. The impact of our efforts has been profound and far-reaching. Through private sponsorship, we've successfully privately sponsored 65 Yazidi individuals to safety, with 7 more on the way, demonstrating the incredible potential of community and private sector collaboration in humanitarian efforts. Our fundraising efforts have raised well over $1.5 million, underpinning our sponsorship and family reunification initiatives, and also highlighting the generosity and the compassion of individuals moved by the Yazidi plight. We've provided support to well over 1,500 government-sponsored refugees, offering vital assistance in addressing the severe mental health challenges that many face as a result of their traumatic experience at the hands of ISIS. This support is critical in helping them adapt to find peace in their new lives in Canada. We run a food program that has successfully raised well over $140,000, ensuring that Yazidi refugees have access to the essential nutritional support they need as they settle into their new communities. We've established community integration and healing programs, including the nationally recognized Healing Farm, English as a second language programs, women's sewing programs, youth soccer programs, and many others. These initiatives go beyond mere economic integration. They are about healing, building a sense of community, and developing a sense of belonging amongst Yazidi refugees in Canada. The establishment of Canada's first Yazidi cemetery is a significant cultural contribution. providing a sacred space for the Yazidi community to honor their deceased in their new homeland. Our advisory capacity has seen us deliver hundreds of presentations to settlement agencies and organizations both within Canada and internationally, sharing key strategies for successful integration and resettlement of Yazidi refugees. And our collaboration for justice with Canada's Federal Police War Crimes Program, and supported by IRCC, the Department of Justice, and Canada's Border Service agencies, we play a pivotal role in the chronicling of the accounts of survivors. This initiative empowers the Yazidi refugees by giving them a platform to share their stories and also contributing significantly to the global effort to hold ISIS accountable for their atrocities. Central to our mission in family reunification, time and again, in conversations with survivors, community leaders, and service providers, it's clear that reuniting families is fundamental to successful resettlement, integration, and healing. The news of a new family reunification policy in Canada aiming to reunite 400 principal applicants with their family members offers a glimmer of hope despite the ongoing struggle. Yet, there remains a critical need for more funding to expand services and enhance support mechanism for the Yazidi community. In collaboration with school divisions, healthcare professionals, financial institutions, and businesses, we understand the necessity of a holistic approach, which includes a wraparound services that are culturally appropriate to provide care that is trauma-informed. Our goal is to set survivors up for success, ensuring they not only survive, but thrive in their new home. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. Really interesting. And Operation Ezra, what a model for how communities can unite together. And we've always talked about it. The Earth Secretariat, where I'm the president, we convene multi-faith communities, and the beauty of communities standing up for each other is just, there's something about it that is so special, and it also creates these strong bonds. And it's really the only way we can effectively stand against persecution, because when each group has to stand by itself, it's just not enough. But if all the religious minorities stand together, and the majority religion, people from the majority stand with them, and that is when we can start seeing changes. But what a beautiful, beautiful story, and the work that you've done, and still so much work I know to be done. So many Yazidis still at risk, still living in camps almost 10 years now after the genocide. And I thought the one thing that you opened with that was really profound was the genocide was not an accident, did not happen overnight. And of course, in the way the media is, in the way that we consume media, is we hear about something right when it happens and it's terrible. But what people on the ground had been seeing is worsening conditions. They had been seeing increased discrimination, dehumanization, which we all know is one of the early steps to genocide. There are steps to genocide, and you can identify them, you can see them. And that's why when we start losing ground and we're seeing worsening conditions globally with religious freedom, and of course the people who have the least status in the communities are the ones most affected, oftentimes the women. When we just allow these worsening conditions, and it's just, but it's just a little worse than last year, just a little bit worse, and a little bit worse, and that's when these horrible things occur, and then we seem surprised by them. And so to be looking for those small changes, and also knowing our rights and lived rights are very different things, and that's something we can talk about in a little bit as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing now from our next speaker, Elga Kinney. She's a human rights activist and the co-director of Center for Legal Assistance and Settlement, which is called CLAS, based in Lahore, Pakistan. CLAS has provided free legal aid and shelter to support victims of religious persecution, which includes blasphemy laws, forced marriages, and forced conversions. CLAS has been instrumental in bringing the issue of forced conversions of religious minority girls to the attention of the international community, and an advocate for effective legislation to stop the forced conversion and misuse of blasphemy laws in Pakistan. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Nadine. Can you hear me? Okay. Discrimination on the basis of gender is a widespread human rights issue in Pakistan that is badly affecting a huge proportion of women in the country. Women make up nearly 48.8% of the total population, and this half indisputably encounters multidimensional problems and witnesses inequalities in the provision of basic human rights, such as access to health, education, which is far from equally provisioned. Boys' schools and colleges in the public sector outnumber those for girls. Equal economic opportunities, political inclusion, and decision-making participation are merely a daydream for many women in Pakistan. Gender relations in Pakistan rest on two basic perceptions: that women is subordinate to men and that a man's honor resides in the action of the women of his family. Culturally entrenched social roles that associate femininity solely with reproduction and subordination are found to undermine efforts towards equality, social harmony, and positive space. Space is allocated to and used differently by men and women. Most women spend the major part of their life physically within the wall boundaries of their home and go out only for serious and approved reasons. Gender inequality is taken to be a fact of life in Pakistan, and it is potentially hampering its socio-economic advancement and progress. Societies dominated by patriarchal hierarchy gives men disproportionate level of power, subjugate women, and shape conflict dynamics. Sadly, Pakistan ranks high on the list of countries that rampant discrimination against female and other sexual minorities, which includes gay, lesbian, and transgender. Being a girl in the patriarchal society is hardly less than a crime. Moreover, if you happen to belong to a Christian, Hindu, or Sikh family, your vulnerability of being born a female increases. In a country where religion plays an important role in shaping social gender norms and developing society's attitude towards its religious minorities, non-Muslim women live under constant threat of being sexually harassed at work and public places, abducted, sexually assaulted, forcefully converted to Islam, and forced into marriage with their abductor. Pakistan has signed and ratified the International Convention Covenant on Civil and Political Rights that states everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. That right shall include freedom to have or to adopt a religion or belief of his choice and freedom, either individually or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in worship, observance, practice, and teaching. No one shall be subjected to coercion which would impair his or her freedom to have adopted a religion or belief of his or her choice. Pakistan also ratified the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, of which Article 16 confirms the right of every woman to enter into marriage only with their free and full consent. The human rights violation that minorities face under the pretense of forced conversion is a sordid reality in Pakistan, and the fact that the majority of the victims of these forced conversions are minor girls speak volume of the vulnerability of the converts and the motivation of those behind these conversions. The increase in these cases is a testament to the fact that Pakistan has miserably failed to uphold any of its obligation under these conventions and international treaties to protect the rights of vulnerable minority women and girls. The legal system almost always fail to deliver justice in forced conversion cases because of the prevalent inefficiencies and the bias among law enforcement officials and court officials. The police, the judiciary, and media act biased in forced conversion to facilitate and enable the conversion of minority women to Islam. In the court proceedings that we have witnessed in cases involving allegations of forced conversions, it is observed that the honorable courts offer a mixed bag of verdicts that contradict one another. Once in a blue moon, the judge passes verdict based on the laws of the land, while on the other hand, they largely issued ruling influenced by their personal belief. For instance, the honorable court in many cases frequently passed the orders of giving the custody of minor girls to their perverted husbands on the pretext of child bride reaching the age of puberty, resorting to the Islamic interpretation regarding the onset of puberty as an acceptable age for marriage with underage girls. Yet the Child Marriage Restraint Act of Pakistan of 1929 makes it an offense to marry a girl below the age of 16 and a boy below the age of 18. In sin, it is 18 years for both sexes. But the most important question is, how does the Muslim rule of puberty as the age of marriage applies to non-Muslims? Through this denial of justice, the state fails to fulfill its duty of protecting the safety of all citizens in cases that constitute violation of children's right and freedom of religion as entrenched in international conventions such as Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Article 30 of the Convention on the Rights of Child, both of which Pakistan is a party. Further, once the women convert, there is no going back, as Islam is a religion that can only be entered and not exit. Apostasy would mean a death sentence. Due to this, many women remain in the clutches of powerful perpetrators. At 3 different times in 2016, 2019, and 2021, an attempt was made to outlaw forced conversion and marriages, including laying guidelines for the court process and placing an age limit of 18 years upon conversion and enabling better due process. But every time the bill against forced conversion was strongly rejected following due process. The bill against forced conversion was dubbed as the bill against the public interest and the principles of Sharia, and the government termed it as an attempt to limit Muslims' right to religious freedom to convert non-Muslims to Islam. This imposition of the religious ideology of the majority community on religious minorities while introducing law and policy reform is highly discriminatory, and it amply demonstrates the state's favoritism towards one religious group rather than the state's impartiality towards all citizens, irrespective of their religious identities. It also reflects to what extent the marginalized groups have access to justice, which impedes the rule of law. A significant gap remains between ratification and implementation at the domestic level. However, Pakistan follows a dualistic system of international treaties, and therefore those that have been ratified still require incorporation into domestic law. Failure on the part of the government of Pakistan to comprehensively bring domestic legislation in line with international treaties had led to the frequent violation of the latter. It is a known fact that laws and regulations alone will not prevent violence against religious minorities, women in Pakistan, but that a much deeper and stronger move is needed to transform the whole mindset of the society, both towards the inadmissibility of violence against women and towards the respect of different creeds and beliefs. Nevertheless, there is a wide range of proactive measures that can and should be taken to encourage this transformation, such as programs promoting the education of religious minority girls, the restoration of health facilities in the religious minorities area, and the provision of microcredit loans to women entrepreneurs to encourage their empowerment. A strong and deep move towards the eradication of bonded labor, under which women are vulnerable to sexual exploitation from the landowner, is also indispensable. The government of Pakistan, whose response has been limited and mostly restrictive, should fully tackle this issue and show a strong commitment to the protection of women from religious minorities. The state should make sure that women vulnerable to abduction will not remain without protection, and police officers who refuse to file an FIR in case of rape and abduction involving religious minorities shall face sanctions. Women development schemes should separately consider minority women because their socioeconomic status often plays a critical role in discriminatory treatment. All the sustainable development program related plans must give special attention to religious minority and their women so that no one is left behind. At present, the Pakistani government needs to have an empathetic approach towards post-conversion issue rather than the defensive approach it has right now. I have brought with me a lot of the cases because I just want to tell you that these 5 of these cases, they are not fictional stories. These are real people. These are real girls who are still missing 14-year-old Maria Shivas, a victim of forced conversion. Kinza, 14-year-old Kinza, who still remain missing. Neha and Maria, 9-year-old Neha and 11-year-old Maria, who still remain missing. Sumbal, 14-year-old Noreen, and I come here today not as a participant, not as a guest, but as a mother. I have a 10-year-old back in Pakistan, and I can relate to these mothers who are suffering because their daughters are missing. And I can relate to them that one day my daughter would be taken away from me. And I take every opportunity that I'm given to knock at the doors and seek help, so it should be stopped. Thank you.
These are such difficult presentations, I can tell from all of you, because of the walk that you've had, and it's so helpful for us to understand. So thank you so much for sharing your heart with us and the conditions on the ground in Pakistan and what that means. And I really grabbed onto the government needs to have an empathetic approach rather than defensive. And we can talk about maybe how to try to engage with governments when we get to the questions to try to talk about these sensitive subjects for them, but yet means the life for these girls. So we have one more presentation. We're going to listen to a taped presentation from Anna Townsend, who is the chair of trustees at Women Without Roofs in Nepal. It's a Christian charity that operates 2 women's homes in Kathmandu and provides stipends for medical bills and rent payment, food aid, materials, and equipment for small businesses. Ms. Townsend is an independent researcher and blogger, having recently published her book, Come With Me to Kathmandu, 12 Powerful Stories of Women's Courageous Faith in Nepal, and is running her blog, Dislocated Christians. Currently, she's researching and writing a book about violence against women and girls in Pakistan. So let's hear from her, and then we can move to some questions.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you today. I've been living and working on and off in Nepal for the last 20 years. However, for the last 2 years, I've been writing a book about women in Pakistan. My research began in Kathmandu, Nepal, where several hundred Pakistani Christians are living as refugees and asylum seekers, having escaped allegations of blasphemy in their homeland. Imagine for a moment a common scene in movies, a room crisscrossed with red laser beams. The slightest move will trigger alarm bells and the protagonist will be caught. Every Christian in Pakistan is similarly trapped by the blasphemy laws. The slightest infraction causes a popular outcry. During my initial research, I found that the typical type of indiscretions that offend the Muslim community and provoke allegations of blasphemy are actions such as dropping a leaflet with verses from the Quran on it, cleaning and painting a wall to remove a poster, producing a church flyer, drinking or eating from the wrong utensils or in the wrong place, making a little more money than your neighbours, or asking the wrong question in school. These are everyday actions, and just like the red laser beams, it is easy to unknowingly cross an unseen line, cause offence, and trigger an uproar. Until I began my research, I had no idea how wildly popular the blasphemy laws were. They have unwavering support among the general population in Pakistan, most of whom would like to see them strengthened rather than weakened, as I'd previously imagined. It is in the context of these blasphemy rules that Christian families become targets for attack. My inquiries have focused on speaking to girls affected by abduction, forced conversion, and forced marriage. However, these girls are simply the weakest members of their families and often become targets because they are easiest to pick off. When I began my interviews, I needed to speak to women over the age of 17, so they would be 18 by the time my book was published and therefore able to give legal permission for their stories to be included. Distressingly, all the girls I've spoken to have been younger. Typically, they are 14 years old when snatched. They are children, and their abductors should be identified as paedophiles and called out for torturing children. When I asked the girls about their childhoods before abduction, they are unable to speak of it. It has no meaning for them now. Remembering happier times appears to be impossible for them, and it is immensely sad to see them talk without hope. By labelling the crime against them as forced marriage, it gives the impression that the girls are older and and of marriageable age. They are not. I've also read strong arguments for using the term enslavement to describe the situation the girls find themselves in. This better emphasises the ongoing abuse the girls are subjected to, and also associates the crime with anti-slavery legislation. Internationally, a victim has more rights if she is recognised as a victim of human trafficking and slavery rather than marriage. One particular girl had no confidence in the police. During her captivity, when the police had first intervened, she and the couple holding her had been taken to a police station. The girl had been locked up in the women's section, in the same cell as the wife of her abuser. This wife had been complicit in the girl's abduction and subsequent torture. In the police station, the wife continued to threaten her. Another family told me that although they had no option but to rely on the police to arrest the abductor, when it came to the rescue, they had to take action themselves, which put them in enormous danger. Their daughter was abandoned by her captor in an empty house, but by accident a mobile phone had been left on a high windowsill. Their daughter managed to telephone for help, but her family knew they had to reach her before the police. If the police took her into their custody, she would be returned to her abductor. They were confident that this would happen, since her abuser had obtained fake marriage and conversion certificates, and although the police knew these had been signed under duress, they would not go against them. Every single survivor I have interviewed has been on the run from her abductor. All of them have had to leave their childhood homes and live, work, and attend school elsewhere. The entire family has been uprooted and they are rebuilding their lives in new cities. Protection from the police and authorities after rescue is entirely absent. Unless the perpetrator is locked up, which in each case has never been for long, there is no plan to keep the girl safe. Her family has to use its own resources and contacts to flee and find refuge. One girl I spoke to had moved elsewhere and started at a new school. In the week prior to my interview with her, her abductor had been spotted lurking outside her new classroom. She was petrified that he would snatch her again. Any initiatives to provide victims with counselling and psychological support will have no effect until the girls feel safe. Furthermore, psychological support needs to extend to the entire family. Female survivors told me they had now got distant relationships with their fathers and older brothers, and this caused them ongoing shame. In summary, blasphemy legislation needs to be overhauled, and much should be done to professionalise the police in Pakistan and help them prioritise the needs of victims. I believe laws are now in place that would protect girls if they were adhered to, but there is an unwillingness by the police to put these laws into action on behalf of Christians. Once justice has been achieved, psychological counselling so desperately needed by the girls and their families will help them all to recover. Thank you for your time.
Really fascinating presentation and heartbreaking how young these girls are. When I was at the Commission on U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, we talked a lot about blasphemy laws and how they're used often against innocent people that didn't commit blasphemy, but if you're accused of it, mob violence, and you know how it is where we see these laws, we see more violence against religious communities, and sometimes there's this thought that the majority of religion makes these laws so they can use them that way. And so I was on a trip. And I was meeting in one of the countries with a renowned religious leader who had put together a multi-religious council that had been a model for really the world for how they'd done it locally. And I remember sitting with him and I was saying to him, how could we move towards more peace? And he said to me, well, if we only had more laws so that people would talk bad about each other's religions, we would have more peace. And you know, I was just stunned by this, expecting him to understand that these laws actually are causing so much violence, not bringing peace to these communities. And so I think, you know, she had said about how the unwavering support for blasphemy laws in Pakistan, which I had not really heard that said directly, but the lack of education for people to understand that these laws actually cause violence. They don't actually cause the peace that this gentleman somehow, in the country he was in, wasn't Pakistan, but another one that also has had lots of violence because of these blasphemy laws that are, again, usually targeted against religious minorities and oftentimes for even
just a rumor that they committed blasphemy is enough to really destroy their family's life and put them at risk. And so, starting with questions, the one that jumped out, I know when we were talking about, in particular about Pakistan and about how they are a signer of all the covenants, treaties, and yet one of the countries where we're seeing so much of this violence. So really, and Anne, I'd love for you to jump in here too, and certainly even ask questions, but what roles do legal frameworks play in the protecting or exacerbating the vulnerabilities of girls and women? So much of the time, we're seeking legal changes, but then we're hearing about a country like Pakistan where some of the laws that they should be following, they're not, and then in Egypt, that's the same too. How is the legal framework playing a role here? You want to jump in?
I can start with pointing out that in a number of these countries, both Egypt, Pakistan, and others, it's actually second-class citizenship with religious minorities. The laws themselves put forward a hierarchy of a religious majority, which then marginalizes the religious minorities. And I think it would be helpful if Ida, you could provide some examples from Pakistan.
Yeah, like the term in the Constitution, it says that Article 36, it says that all minorities shall have equal guaranteed rights. But then the term minority has not been defined in Constitution. So we don't really exactly know what they mean. So unless it's defined, it's very ambiguous. And same goes for other constitutional rights as well. It's written, but at the same time, there are constitutional amendments or articles that bear minorities from taking up certain positions within the country. If the state has a religion, Islam, then what is my status in that country? And then also under Article 25, it says that non-Muslim cannot hold the position, cannot hold the office of a prime minister or a president or any key position. So that puts me in a second-class citizen. And when it comes to testimonies, one testimony for female Christian women makes one testimony. So in a lot of cases, I can't even testify. If somebody attacks me, my testimony doesn't hold as a. Yeah.
Any others for that one?
So in Egypt, the constitution there, the second article of the constitution says that Sharia law is the primary source of legislation. So just for that reason alone, you have the unequal application of laws, and plus also laws that don't apply the same way to Muslims as well as Christians. For example, it's super easy, 1, 2, 3, to convert from Christianity to Islam. As in the cases of forced conversions, 1, 2, 3, and there's an ID card for a Christian girl that says Muslim on it. To do it the other way around, I don't know who it was that said it. To enter is really easy, but to exit is almost impossible. That was right. Same thing. So to revert to Christianity after being forced to convert to Islam is extremely challenging. And for Muslims who'd like to convert to Christianity, it's almost impossible. Just because of the way the legal system is and the way the laws are. So the legal framework definitely needs a lot of improvement, aside from the fact that the laws that are there to protect are not actually implemented.
Really interesting, the unequal application of laws. So sometimes there's not laws, but sometimes there are, but they're not applied fairly to religious minorities. What else do that one too? Okay. Yep.
So in the case of Iraq, kind of what I alluded to, so under Iraq's constitution, Islam is the main religion that's recognized, and that's seeped in through kind of every policy and constitution article and things like that. So even that in itself is a huge contradiction to other pieces where they say we do recognize other ethnic minorities and things like that. but everything comes back to Islam and must abide by those rules. You can have your own rules, but if they contradict Islam, then yours are negated. So it's a whole, right, it's a contradiction in and of itself, even though on paper it says that. And then again, lived reality of that, if anything is taken to court, or there's an abduction or anything like that, or if a woman is taken, if a Yazidi woman is taken by a Muslim man, if they happen to have a child of rape or anything like that, if the man is from a Muslim Islamic background, that child is automatically his, belongs to him and not her, and then she is forced to convert because there are different issues within each community as well as recognizing when they come back and different issues like that, right? So there's a multitude of different layers to this issue, and I remember in one of the meetings when I was recently in Iraq, one of the officials in the Iraqi government said, "Are Yazidis even recognized in Canada?" Like, they didn't mean it like offensively or anything. Like, her just was curious, like, what is the situation there? And I said, like, I grew up in Canada. I never even been asked like a question like that. Never even crossed my mind that I was guaranteed safety and security and my ability to express, my religion in Canada or anything like that. And I was so taken aback, and I'm rarely taken aback by questions. And I said, yeah, like it's guaranteed in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we live that and proudly. And I say it to my Muslim friends, to my Jewish friends, to my Christian friends, like, and all that. And she said, oh, well, here we only recognize, I believe she said it was 5 religions that are recognized, and in the Kurdistan region, it's 8 religions. So even the recognition of religions becomes a huge issue. So what if you're not a recognized religious group? Like, where does that leave you then? If, Yazidis, as bad as we have it, are considered recognized, I wonder how bad it is for those who are not recognized.
Right, really good point. Or those non-believers,
Yeah.
right, who in this part can often be put in the same category as believers of non-religions. What I think an important question for me, hearing all of your stories, is how can the international community support the women in these communities? What can we do from an advocacy standpoint? From what could the U.S. government advocate for the U.S. government to step in, or the international community? So I'm curious to get your thoughts for the top line things that maybe that we're not doing that we could be doing better to stand for these communities. And whoever wants to start.
I think diplomacy plays a very important role, and we have witnessed it over and over again, especially in blasphemy, high-profile blasphemy cases. We have seen that when international community comes in, results are better and people are acquitted. And we have seen it in Ayub Masih case, we have seen in Salamat Masih case, Asia Bibi case, a lot of other cases. And I think that the community, when you give aid to especially European countries and Western countries, when money comes into Pakistani banks or Pakistani state, it should come with a condition that certain conditions will apply, and you have to use these funds towards minority community as well, because we don't see these funds ever, and nothing has been projected. Maybe it might be on the paper, but nothing has been done in practice specifically for minorities.
That's really good. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
Okay, just quick. Is this one? Okay, yeah. Just quickly, 2 things. Well, first and foremost, to any Yazidi you talk to, survivor in Iraq or in the diaspora communities, the first ask is the safe return of the 2,700 Yazidi women and girls who are still in captivity, still being used as sex slaves throughout Iraq and throughout the region as well. So the safe return of those women and girls before I think we can talk about any other type of intervention or rebuilding. So that first and foremost. And then legal reforms for sure to ensure explicit protection for groups like the Yazidis, strengthening institutions in Iraq with the assistance of international organizations and governments around the world. And really support in assisting in rebuilding efforts in security in Sinjar to hold Iraqi governments, Kurdistan regional governments, to account for what they've promised ethnic and religious minorities post, ISIS attacks and post-genocide. I think it's really going to set a precedent moving forward. We're seeing mass exodus of Christians from the region, Yazidis from the region. So really the stark reality is the alternative to not engaging in ensuring safety and security is that these communities leave or they're just wiped off the map.
That's right. Thank you. Any other, okay? Should we, if you want to, and then we're going to see if there's any questions in the audience. So if you have a question, let us know.
So first, education and awareness is on the top of the list, obviously, because unless everyone actually understands that there's a problem, it'll never begin to get addressed, which is back to what you were saying. We need to look for it. The second thing is our counterparts, who we have here in the U.S. is communicating with their counterparts in Egypt. They are going back and forth on these issues. When we speak to representatives that do visit Egypt, they say, well, we address this and we address that, but there doesn't really seem to be any movement forward. I would recommend that these representatives that are making these trips to Egypt perhaps make connections with organizations that do have access to that information so they can have a better understanding of what it is that they're facing and who it is that they're speaking to when they are in Egypt so they could have a more meaningful conversation. And then aid, of course. Aid to Egypt, it's a huge number. And there should be some strings attached. There should be some strings attached. Your human rights record should be connected to how much money you get. And then where that money is sent when it's eventually on the ground. Some of it should be directed to minority communities. One of the things Coptic Solidarity actually is working on right now and really pushing for is recognition that the Coptic people in Egypt are the indigenous people of Egypt, which comes with a whole slew of protections. But yeah, awareness, education, aid, pressure through counterparts and things like that.
It's really interesting when you look at these countries, Pakistan, Iraq, and Egypt, that we've just been focusing on specifically, although this is representing a broader, of course, situation, but these countries in particular all have strong relationships with the U.S. and the international community, and all get aid from the U.S. and the international community, and conditional aid having some strings attached. It makes a lot of sense, and I know that's been a tough topic when we're having discussions with the State Department, but a really interesting idea that all of you kind of brought up. So we're going to see if anybody in the audience has any questions they would like to ask.
Can I just add one
Sure.
more
Yes,
thing?
please do.
The same what she said, that when high-profile visits or diplomatic missions comes to Pakistan, it's very important that you also visit the people who work on the ground, because it's very important that you get the true picture and the first-hand information, and especially when we know that diplomatic or international community is coming to Pakistan, we make sure that you have a testimony of the actual victims so you can actually speak to them, because it speaks volume, and then you can take the first-hand information instead of just taking reports from the government. So it's very important
That is so key. I know when I was at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, I remember thinking that the most important meetings we were going to have when we traveled to a country was with the government officials, but it always ended up being civil society and the leaders on the ground were the meetings, and then it got to the point where those were the ones we were looking for, most excited, because that's where we would learn the most. And unfortunately, the politicization of risk has been a real factor for, I know, the U.S. government in particular, but some of the other governments too, that, in places like Iraq, they don't really leave the compound. I remember one time having a meeting with some of the Yazidi community, some of the Muslims, the Sinjar community, Muslims in Sinjar, and having iftar with them and hearing some of the things they were sharing are things they would have never said in a boardroom in the consulate. in an hour-long meeting, but after having tea and smoking cigarettes and having this conversation, you're hearing like, wow, so this is what people think here. And I mean, you can't, it's really hard to get that information any other way. And I think that that's one of the things with diplomacy, with the risk in some of these countries is even these wonderful diplomats that are trying, they don't have the opportunity to go out and hear this kind of information, which is why it's so important for them to be meeting with all of you and trying their best to understand the situation on the ground, hearing those stories. But I think they're harder to come by when you're behind this wall that you're not allowed to leave very often, which we've seen a lot in Iraq. It's been a lot of the problem there in particular because I visit there, so I'm able to see that myself. Any questions from the audience before we close?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Soraya Dean from Los Angeles. Thank you for this panel and Jubilee campaign. I was at a conference last week and they talked about women breaking the glass ceiling. Here, these are women, they don't have a ground to stand on, And this hurts me and this moves me because I'm a Muslim. And I know everything you say. I know this. And we have tried very hard to raise these issues from within the community. And we are seen as betrayers and sellouts and we don't know enough. So, and I'm also a founding member of the North American Muslim Reform Movement. And I'm wondering how you can help us, Anne and Nadine particularly, how can our voices be amplified? Because we are calling out these offenses. We are calling out the mainstream Muslim organizations. We are very happily living in the West with every possible freedom and choice. And we don't speak out enough for the women and the minorities. And I feel I'm a minority within a minority, a minority Muslim woman who calls out for this kind of reform. So I'm wondering if we can form a bridge, an alliance where the Muslim reformers' voices are amplified. Because anything that comes out of the United States has some level of power and can create some kind of impact and influence. So I'm with you, and I say sorry on behalf of all Muslims because these are state-sponsored violations that are used to abuse women particularly, so that the patriarchal agendas can flourish. Thank you.
Thank you. Take the microphone. Thank you.
I definitely appreciate those comments. Thank you that you can share from your heart what your passion is to also see all women rise. And I think that is a tremendous opportunity. I do know that many of the individuals, they need in-country, for instance, legal help or social services. And those are ways I think that within countries when they suffered these things, if there were interfaith groups or Muslim groups that also seek to help the victims, that would carry a great deal of influence as well, because it may change the cultural norms. And somebody had mentioned education. I think it's really vitally important that educational curriculum be looked at. I know you serve, the IRF office in the State Department, have looked at it in a number of countries. For instance, very familiar in Pakistan with the level of biases that are taught, and that would be ways of encouraging curriculum to be inclusive of minorities rather than to portray them in a negative light. I think changing the societal values, and that's where NGOs, organizations, civil society can encourage those changes, and those are structural changes. It may take ongoing efforts, but we have to keep banging on that door to make sure it opens and the education changes and people are able to equalize and treat one another with dignity, respect. We are all made in the image of God. That's my belief. We all have dignity. We all deserve respect from one another because we're all made in His image. And that's something which needs to be communicated to every child, that is then lifted up. And it also means there's responsibilities of not harming others. And then not harming others, whether it's victimization of these small children, they're children that both Dr. Townsend and Kenny was sharing about. These are children that need to know they're made in the image of God. They have dignity, worth, value, and we need to communicate that in civil society and encourage that the government actually supports that as well.
Really good points. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. No, it's such an important point to engage the majority religion and bring up advocates, and certainly with young people. You know, there are some organizations doing great work to do that, because it's so much more powerful when we're all working together than when it's religious minorities on one side of the table and the religious majority on the other, and to really bring together those groups. And to me, it kind of seems like, there's so many different ways to approach it, but obviously, the legal framework and improving conditions on the ground, but also caring for those communities that are being persecuted. And so you've seen a blending of all of those skills here. But really, the key is how, from an advocacy standpoint, to call attention to these crimes so that people are held accountable. But also, we're hoping there are people that could do cooperative engagement with these governments, so they can get them to change the way they're looking at minorities too. And so there needs to be space, and they're usually not the same people. So somebody may be working with the government, somebody else may be putting the bar, and then someone else is working with the community, but to care for them. And so in this movement to really change conditions on the ground, I feel like with all the different gifts, we need to make space for